Welcome. I'll give folks a chance to join before we get started. As I see people are coming in now, we'll just give a couple minutes for folks to get in and get situated. Great. Well, I see folks are still coming in, but I want to kick us off here. My name's Anna Keller. I'm the Executive Director for Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. I'm so glad that you could join us today for our recap of the 2023 legislative session. It was a busy few months here for us, and set us up for some exciting things coming next. So excited to be talking about that with you and to have Caitlin LaCase here, who is the director of Protect Maine Elections and the campaign that's going to be heading to ballot this fall. So between the two of us, we're going to take you through the money and politics landscape and what was going on in Augusta this winter, spring, and into the summer. So just to give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today, first off, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the context of where we were when the session started back in January, what we were hoping to accomplish this year, and then the things that went well, the things that did not go the way we wanted them to, the number of things that are left to be continued when the session comes back next year. And then I want to turn it over to Caitlin to talk about how Protect Maine Elections is now headed to ballot as, and we're going to be asking everybody to get involved with the Yes on 2 campaign. So like I said, but for the benefit of those who maybe are just joining us, my name's Anna Keller. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections and of the League of Women Voters of Maine. We're going to be talking about MCCE's work here today to make sure that money doesn't call the shots when it comes to the policies and the work that we can get done in our state. I'm also very happy to be joined here today by our colleague, Caitlin LaCase, who is the campaign manager for Protect Maine Elections. And Caitlin's going to be talking more about that campaign and what's coming next with it, as well as what happened to those efforts that many of you were involved in over the course of the last few months. So just to give us a little bit of a sense of context here, what we were dealing with when this legislative session started in January. So each 2-year session, we have a new group of legislators come in. We try to set some goals about what we're hoping to get done, knowing that we also are going to always end up with some defensive work. This year, we came in having just accomplished what we thought was a pretty exciting reform the previous time, having passed a ban on contributions from corporations to legislators or legislator-controlled so-called leadership PACs. That had already been accomplished coming into this year. And I'm mentioning that because, as you're going to hear, turns out our work was not fully done on that. We also had in the previous session worked on a ban on contributions from foreign government-owned entities to referendum campaigns. That bill had passed the legislature, but been vetoed by the governor. And so after that, a campaign started, Protect Maine Elections, and collected all of the signatures required to put that bill on the ballot as a referendum, along with a call to our congressional delegation to support an anti-corruption amendment to the US Constitution. And so with those signatures in hand, we then came back to the legislature for another try at getting that bill passed. We also came into this legislative session with a legislature that had used, the majority of whom had used clean elections when they were running for office. The participation rate in 2022 was up. 64% of candidates, of legislators used it, as opposed to 59% the time before. So that meant that members of both parties had that experience, and that always helps when we're coming in talking about defending and expanding clean elections. Finally, I did want to mention that in the 2021 November election, Portland voted to create its own municipal clean election system. And so a lot of the work that we were doing this past spring, especially, but we're continuing to do, is around implementing that system and making sure that we can have a really successful clean election system at the local level. And so I will say a few words about where we're at with that, even though the focus today is going to be on statewide activities. All right. So what was our agenda coming into this legislative session? I grouped this into a couple of categories here. So first off, disclosure. Transparency is so important when it comes to having a functioning democracy, because voters need to understand where, who is trying to have an influence over their elected officials, and for voters to have that information when they're making their own decisions, both for who's behind referendum questions that they may be voting on, who is funding their elected officials. Having a strong and effective disclosure system is a really important piece of this puzzle. We know that while Maine has some pretty strong disclosure laws in some ways, that there are definitely some gaps there. One of those is that when PACs are able to spend in campaigns in Maine, they are often able to hide the original source of their funding, because disclosure only is asking, well, who gave the money to the campaign? It's not saying, well, who funded that entity that gave that money, and tracing it all the way back to an original source, which maybe was a paycheck, investment income, the treasury of a corporation. Those are original sources. But these PACs that take in money and give out money are often the barrier to us seeing where it's really coming from. And so a couple of states have passed what we call true source or original source disclosure. And Senator Rick Bennett proposed LD 1690, which would add Maine to the list of the states that are doing that strong form of disclosure. We also knew that there was a gap at the municipal level. And without going into all of the details of how municipalities and town elections are covered under campaign finance law, it was clear that in small towns that don't have any requirements under state law, there's a real gap that was happening because no disclosure was being required. And in those towns, we were starting to see some really high spending referendum elections that could look like a town deciding what type of broadband system it was going to have, or whether to have a solar farm in that community. Some of these are incredibly impactful decisions for the community and for the bottom line of companies that might have a stake in it. And so we were seeing huge amounts of money being spent without any disclosure, or what we think was huge amounts of money, I will have to say, because we don't know unless there is disclosure. And so that bill, which was sponsored by Representative Matlack, was LD 1336. And it was another way for us to make sure that voters have the information that they need. So as you can see, I put green check marks and I just realized I flipped this. And so please bear with my own dyslexia here, that I managed to put the check mark and the arrow in the wrong bill. So can fix that. But the LD 1336 should have the green check mark, and the yellow arrow for continuing onwards to next year should actually be going next to 1690 and true source disclosure. Anyway, we'll get more into what happened with those bills in a second. The other big parts of our agenda were about clean elections. So every year we have to make sure that the statewide clean elections program that we just saw many candidates use is funded, that there aren't any bad bills passed that could weaken the program. And this year we also really looked at how we could expand the program, knowing that large amounts of money are often being spent and increasingly being spent in county level races, especially for district attorney and sheriff. And those offices that are so much about how our criminal justice system works really need to be above any suspicion of corruption. And so we're looking at, we have a great tool to ensure that that happens, which is clean elections. So let's expand the program to district attorney and sheriff, and maybe even county commissioner offices. That bill had a good hearing and is also in its coming back for more next year. And then finally, like I mentioned, Protect Maine Elections came in with the really strong number of signatures and popular support. And the goal this year was to pass it through the legislature, because the legislature is the first port of call for a referendum. If you can get it done there, you don't have to take all of the time and effort to put it to ballot and have and send it out to the voters. So we were hoping we would get that done this year, and came very, very close. But in the end, it is actually going to go out to the ballot this November. And so we'll get into more of that in a moment as well. So we came in with a pretty ambitious agenda. I will just say this is probably more than we've tried in the last few sessions in terms of what we're trying to get done on money and politics this year. And overall, we got some good victories and some things that were held over. Like I mentioned, this local referendum bill, 1336, which requires that anyone who's spending over $5,000 on a local referendum has to file with the State Ethics Commission and has to therefore disclose who they are and what they're spending. That bill passed and is now going into law. So yay, that was a great victory this year, and make sure that voters have more information on those really important decisions that are being made within their communities about what they want to do. From the good to the bad, though, the next piece that we have to talk about was something we weren't expecting. And so it was not on that agenda list because we were not expecting coming into this session, though what we were going to have to spend a lot of time and effort on was fighting a repeal of the corporate contribution ban that we had just passed the year before. Like I mentioned, this ban that had just gone into effect this past January stops corporate contributions to legislators and to leadership PACs. And so corporate here includes not just what you might think of as a corporation, the Exxon Mobils of the world, and it also means nonprofits and PACs also are being banned in this space. And so a lot of those entities that I mentioned earlier that are those PACs that collect lots of donations and funnel them places were also banned under this. What we saw happen was some people have always been opposed to banning corporate contributions. Other people were theoretically for it, but when the law became, we would say, misinterpreted by a lot of those national donors, they took it to mean that their donations couldn't go not only to the legislators and their PACs, but to the PACs controlled by the caucuses in the legislature or the parties. We had intentionally kept that as an option so that those systems of party funding could still happen. But in practice, the way the law was getting interpreted meant that money wasn't coming in. With that, we saw an unfortunate side of agreement that the bill had to be repealed from, on the one hand, the people who were always opposed to it, on the other hand, the people who said, well, we like this in theory, but it's not working for us in practice because the money that we think we need, isn't coming in. That was a pretty upsetting place to be. A lot of these legislators had supported this bill before, You don't want to see them take a major step backwards like this. And so we fought this, and we fought it really hard. And a lot of you fought it with us. We had over 600 letters go to legislators from their constituents protesting the repeal of corporate contribution ban. And it made a big difference, because what we ended up with was a bill that, while it did repeal the law right now, directs the Ethics Commission to come back with a new bill that tries to make clearer this distinction between where corporate contributions are and aren't allowed, and that tries to continue the original intent of what we were going for here. And at the time, in the middle of a busy session, a lot of people just thought, let's just repeal it. Let's just repeal it and deal with it later. We don't want to have to come back next year and talk about this again. But it was that constituent pressure and people saying, no, you can't just say you're for money in politics reform and then repeal this when it's inconvenient for you. That pressure made this move forward. And we want to thank a couple of legislators, thinking about Rick Bennett, Nicole Grahowski, Ben Shipman, Cameron Rennie, Mike Tipping, who all stood up in the Senate and said, no, this isn't right. And they being willing to take that courageous stand also made a big difference here. So not where we wanted to be, but we have a really good opportunity to come back next year and keep fighting for this, because we know at the end of the day, what Maine people want is not corporations funding the legislature. Along with that, other things that we're going to be coming back in with the second year of our session, true source disclosure, that had a strong vote in committee. And we saw a lot of interest from legislators in this question. Let's say, if there is going to be money coming in, especially given the repeal of that corporate contribution ban, we have to at least know who's spending it. And so that idea, which goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, that at least we have to have transparency, at least we have to have disclosure, that also is playing out in Maine. And so we have got a good shot at this bill next year. Still going to be a fight. There's still a lot of people who would like to not disclose donors, but we've got a shot at that next year. We're going to keep working on that. And then County Clean Elections also had a really strong vote coming out of its committee. It actually was a bipartisan vote, which was really exciting to be able to see that there was support from Democrats, Republicans, and independents for this. What's next for both of these bills is that they will now be heading toward the full legislature, votes in the House and the Senate. They can succeed there. They'll go to the governor for signature or veto. For both of these, but especially for the County Clean Elections, the other question is around funding. We want to make sure that there's enough money in the Clean Elections Fund that as we add offices to it, that it is sufficient for those candidates and for the rest of the program and administrative costs. And so we're going to be needing to look at how do we make sure that program is funded, that gets into a supplemental budget. It's a little hard to do in the second year of the session, but honestly, this was a much better place for this bill to be than we thought. We were sort of putting this out there. Maybe this was going to be a test balloon year. We had no one been talking about clean elections at the county level. So let's get this idea out there. And we were surprised by how much support there was, including from sitting district attorneys. The Kennebec County Attorney Megan Maloney came and testified in support of the bill. We heard that people don't want to have to be raising money from the people who might appear in front of them in court. So really hopeful, and I think we've got a great shot at coming back and moving on these bills next year. All right, and so I am going to pass over to Caitlin to talk about where we are with Protect Maine Elections. I did just want to say that if you have questions about anything that I've talked about or questions for Caitlin, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we're going to get to questions and more discussion at the end, as well as talking about how you can get involved with what comes next. So with that, pass to Caitlin.
Thank you, Anna, and so glad to be here and grateful for your support and the support of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections over the last year, over a year now on this effort. And we're grateful. It's a wonderful collaboration. So just a little bit of background. The Protect Maine Elections initiative has two main provisions. One is that it affirms Maine's support for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would allow Congress and states to set reasonable limits on campaign contributions and spending, and charges the Maine Ethics Commission with reporting annually on how our congressional delegation is doing to forward such an amendment. The second piece, which is what most folks are focused on, and is how the question will be worded on the ballot, will prohibit foreign governments and entities that they control or own from spending money in referendum campaigns and Maine referendum campaigns. Most voters are shocked to hear that that is currently allowed, but the FEC recently ruled that there's this loophole that while those entities aren't allowed to give to candidate campaigns, that unless explicitly prohibited by states or municipalities, they can give to referendum campaigns, which is kind of a shock. This is how voters can help influence our laws, and we have foreign governments who can dump millions of dollars in. So that is the initiative. There was similar legislation in 2021, which passed the legislature with broad bipartisan support and was vetoed by the governor. Again, this is looking back to 2021. Unsure of what the subsequent legislative session would bring, Maine voters decided that they needed to really take this into their own hands. As you all know, because you're here, we aren't ones just to sit on the sidelines. So Maine voters organized the Protect Maine Elections campaign, and over 400 volunteers spent the year collecting signatures from over 80,000 of their Maine neighbors and colleagues and friends and family. So, and I think several people on this Zoom right now helped to collect those signatures so thank you. I know it's not easy, but this was actually one of the most easy things to collect signatures for, because Maine voters support this. So after we submitted our signatures and the Secretary of State subsequently certified those petitions, like with all initiated bills, the legislature had the opportunity to pass it outright. And in fact, the legislature with broad bipartisan support did enact this bill. And unfortunately, it was then vetoed by the governor, despite the broad bipartisan support in the legislature and the near universal support among Maine voters. So now, and we missed the bill after the governor vetoed it. It came back for veto day, where the legislature had the opportunity to override the veto, and it started in the House. And we were just 9 votes shy of an override, which is also remarkable, because keep in mind, to override a veto, you need 2/3 support of members present, and we were just nine votes short of that 2/3 support. So it was really quite close. But again, Maine voters, as they have during this entire process, are going to carry on the cause, and we are going to ballot on November 7th. As Anna nicely wrote here, we know that we'll be question number 2, so make sure you vote yes on 2. And we need all the help we can get. This campaign is really driven by the grit and determination and grassroots support of Maine voters, but our opponents will have tens of millions of dollars to spend against us. And we know that we're on the right side. And if the election were held today, we would win, but we can't leave anything to chance, because we now have 3 months where our opponents are organizing, and they're trying to protect and hold on to their political power. And we are trying to return that power to the voters. So I hope you don't mind, I am going to pop into the chat if I can figure out how, maybe, I don't know if I can do that. It's only going to go to the host and panelist. If I type it in, Jen, I don't know if you can then share it with everybody. But I typed in a link where folks can sign up to volunteer. Thank you, Jen. We will be at fairs and festivals throughout the fall. We need help, tabling and talking with voters. We will be holding house parties. There will be, please write letters to the editors. If you are a member of a Rotary or whatever, please invite us to speak with your organization. There's lots of ways to engage. So we will just be working all fall, all the rest of the summer and the fall to get it done, and are grateful. Thank you in advance for all of your help. Did I cover everything, Anna?
Yes, you covered what I wanted. And so now it's a great opportunity for us to say what questions that people might have for either of us. So I am just pulling up here what we've got. We are in here. We'd love to know whether there is a conflict with Pine Tree Power's current messaging, which just seems like a great opportunity to talk about, how this issue is distinct from some of the other things that are on the ballot, though they may get linked in people's mind. I don't know if you want to address those connections, Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, so there's no conflict with their messaging. I think, the campaigns are distinct and going after different ends, but there's no conflict. Yeah.
And we also had a request, I'll just put here that for signs, volunteers, and social media images or short videos that we can use to educate people, which they all sound like good ideas, and I'm sure some of them will be coming later on.
It's all coming. Yes, absolutely. And thank you. And Anna, just because I don't have contact information of the folks who registered, if as we have things, if you all can help get that information out, it would be super helpful. But yes, everything will be coming. We don't have signs yet, but we will. But in the meantime, please do, sign up on the link I sent saying that you're willing to volunteer, and ask your friends and family to join.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question Catherine put in the chat here: what was Mill's reasoning for the vetoes? So I'll also pass that to Caitlin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, after I'm done talking, I'll just share her veto letter right in here. I mean, she had several different reasons. I almost don't even want to give it the light of day because it was very misguided. And it was, how do I put it? It was almost a red herring of the issue itself. I think folks can't address the issue of prohibiting, they can't win on the issue of prohibiting foreign government. And so they are trying to, poke little holes in different things that just don't frankly have merit. So, but I will pop the veto letter in here that you can take time to read.
Okay, thanks. So both Mari and Karen had questions about the municipal disclosure bill, which I talked about, that did pass, and whether it applies to candidates as well as referendums. So it just applies to referendum elections right now. That is the bill that passed. So currently, if you live in a town under 15,000 people, unless you live in Bar Harbor, Standish, and Union, which, as Mari pointed out, applied to be considered under the state's rules, there is no requirement for disclosure for candidates. We also see a real need for that, and would like to work on it in the future. The challenge with that piece is, the challenge with all of this is, does the municipality track that and publish that information, or does the State Ethics Commission do it? And with the referendum question, the state was able to take that on without it being a huge extra amount of work for them. The State Ethics Commission felt like taking on all of the candidates in all of those towns would be a big extra task for them. And so if we want to go that direction, it's likely to mean, expanding the staff and support at the Ethics Commission, which I think, again, we should consider. It's important, and especially if people are seeing, as Karen mentioned, more more partisan school board elections, more intensity in those spaces. This is, a good thing for us to be looking at. But a lot of what the Ethics Commission does is, answering questions candidates have. It's not just, collecting the forms and posting them online. There's a lot of support around that as well. And so right now we're in a bit of a hot potato situation where the small towns say, well, we don't have the capacity to do it. And the Ethics Commission says, we don't have the capacity to do it. So whether, we need to build more capacity because this is important. So that's the top level thing. And so it only applies to referendum questions. I saw Amari had a couple of follow-up questions here. The sponsor in the legislature was Ann Matlack, Representative Matlack. And this restriction doesn't apply to county commissioners because this is just on referendums at the municipal level. But county commissioners actually are part of the state level campaign finance system. So if you go to mainecampaignfinance.com, you can see all of what money is raised and spent by county commissioner candidates through the State Ethics Commission. I'm just seeing if we have any other questions here. Yes, thank you, Caitlin, put in the chat there.
Sorry, Jen, mine is only going to the host and panelists. So I shared the veto letter, if you could share that. And then I've also shared Campaign Legal Center's response to the veto letter because they're attorneys and I would just be copying what they said anyway. So that gives you a good kind of example of the back and forth. Jen, if you could share both those, thank you. Sorry.
Linda had a question for you, Caitlin. I hear you say influence of foreign governments. Do you mean influence of foreign governments or foreign businesses or both?
Yeah, so it is foreign governments and businesses that are owned or controlled by foreign governments. So yeah, that's what it is.
Great, thanks. And then the last question that I see here is, does the ballot question cover clean elections for gubernatorial race? So this ballot initiative doesn't have anything to do with clean elections. We have clean elections for the governor's race. And so what we need to make sure in order for in 2026 for us to have clean elections candidates using that system is A, making sure there's enough funding for it. So that's going to be a question that we're going to look into. And then B, encouraging candidates to use it and that's partly hearing from their supporters that it matters to them and that seeing them using clean elections would make them more likely to support them. And so there may be some other tweaks. We've been talking to people who have run using clean elections before about how to make the system as good as it can, but it's actually, the option is there. And so we want to encourage candidates who are thinking about running for governor in 2026 to use it. All right, we have one more question here about the foreign contributions again. Can you briefly explain what foreign contributions are aiming to influence? Well, it could be in any number of things. I don't know if you want to address any of that, Caitlin.
Well, I think you're exactly right. So right now, foreign governments and entities that they control or own are allowed to, and in fact do, dump millions of dollars into our referendum campaign. So they can, as of right now, they can choose the campaign. They could essentially create the campaign if they wanted to, which is also a scary proposition. And it's worth saying that the government of Maine is not permitted to participate in such referendum campaigns. So it is unthinkable that we would allow foreign governments to do so. I hope that answers the question.
And that they're not allowed to contribute in, foreign individuals anyway. Nobody's, allowed to contribute to individual candidates. So this referendum piece really is a loophole that stands out in contrast to the rest of how we treat that. And I think it's also important to point out that none of this stops governments from lobbying, from being interviewed and writing in the newspaper, from doing anything else they need to do to get their viewpoints out there, but they shouldn't be able to use campaign contributions to buy that influence.
Yep.
Great. All right, I'm just checking here to see if we have any more questions. It looks like we have gotten, I think we've gotten answers to everybody here. If you have other questions that we have not gotten to, you're always free to reach out to me. My email is just anna@mainecleanelections.org, and I'm always happy to chat. I mean, I really appreciate the thoughtful questions and interactions that we've had here. I did want to say, Caitlin mentioned how you can volunteer with the Protect Maine Elections campaign, and I absolutely encourage you to get involved. That's going to be, you know, the next few months here is the time to make that happen. If what you're really, you know, curious and passionate about is clean elections or any of these other things we've been talking about, we are always looking for folks to join our Money and Politics team. And so this is a group that we meet fairly regularly, and we look through legislation that's coming up. We talk and do about what our position should be. We do research, which right now is a lot of what we're doing, is both looking through data and trying to understand how contributions are coming in and what the realities are, so we can make good policy. And also talking to people and interviewing people, for example, who have run for county level offices before, and understanding what their needs are. And so there's lots of ways to plug in. And while this can be a deep and weedy topic to get into, all of us started out not knowing anything about it. And so we really encourage people who are curious about this to get involved. And there's a lot of ways that that can happen. But you can always do so through the MCCE website. We have a volunteer tab there, or you feel free to reach out to me directly. I am so grateful for everyone's attention today. Please connect with the Protect Maine Elections Yes on 2 campaign. Jen also put in the chat here our MCCE volunteer page. This recording is going to be, this webinar is recorded. We will have it archived both on our Facebook and on our website. And I think we will also share out an email to everybody who was registered with the recording and some of these links that we've put in the chat. So with that, thank you so much. And thank you again, Caitlin, for coming on and sharing this time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it all.
Take care.